In old age, as in every phase of life, a person faces a profound question about their own existence. How can one preserve self-awareness when relationships fade and familiar supports gradually disappear? This question arises when the passage of time becomes unavoidable and those who once seemed irreplaceable slowly vanish from one's life. Yet it is at this very moment that Kant's philosophy on moral autonomy, freedom, and the inner lawgiver becomes profoundly relevant. Old age is a test for those who can maintain an inner connection with themselves regardless of what happens around them. As Kant said, one must be a law unto oneself, not a slave to external influences. In youth, we often forget this because our happiness is tied to others, family, friends, partners. But old age dissolves this dependence. It does not show us all connections, but reveals which ones are truly valuable and which are mere illusions. This becomes clear when children move out, friends drift away, and spouses become strangers. Those we once considered our supports turn out to be temporary companions. As Kant pointed out, the only reliable support is one's own moral strength. In other words, in old age, we must learn to rely not on the transient, but on what remains within us. Kant describes this as the autonomy of the mind, the ability to act according to an inner moral law independent of external circumstances. Let's explore the 4 pillars that form the foundation of life in old age. The first pillar is the ability to be alone without experiencing solitude as misery. Kant understood being alone not as mere isolation, but as a prerequisite for inner freedom. He famously stated, "Man must learn to live within himself, for the external world cannot bestow true happiness." As we age and external relationships fade, we must cultivate an inner connection with ourselves. If we fail to learn to be alone, life becomes an empty space filled only with chaos. Those who cannot find peace in their own presence become dependent on others and, once considered, our supports turn out to be temporary companions. As Kant pointed out, the only reliable support is one's own moral strength. In other words, in old age, we must learn to rely not on the transient, but on what remains within us. Kant describes this as the autonomy of the mind, the ability to act according to an inner moral law independent of external circumstances. Let's explore the 4 pillars that form the foundation of life in old age. The first pillar is the ability to be alone without experiencing solitude as misery. Kant understood being alone not as mere isolation, but as a prerequisite for inner freedom. He famously stated, "Man must learn to live within himself, for the external world cannot bestow true happiness." As we age and external relationships fade, we must cultivate an inner connection with ourselves. If we fail to learn to be alone, life becomes an empty space filled only with chaos. Those who cannot find peace in their own presence become dependent on others and the house or organizing objects. It involves creating inner order, which forms the foundation for moral principles. When one organizes their surroundings, they also bring order to their mind. A tidy home reflects a pure soul. For example, a woman may have 3 wardrobes full of unnecessary things: old clothes, a broken light fixture, keepsakes she cannot part with. Kant would argue that attachment to the past, frozen in things, becomes a burden that hinders progress. In old age, when time no longer allows for rectifying past mistakes, it is crucial to let go of the past to preserve energy for the present. Purity, according to Kant, is a necessary condition for the development of freedom. Those who cannot create order in their daily lives will struggle to develop inner freedom. Therefore, order in daily life is the first step toward following the moral law. The third pillar is indifference to the judgment of others. Kant argued that true freedom lies in acting independently of the opinions of others. Freedom is the ability to act according to one's own inner law, not to seek the approval of others. In old age, when external ties weaken and the body loses strength, One must accept that others may no longer understand them, that their life no longer meets others' standards. But those who learn to ignore others' judgments gain freedom. Kant wrote, "One must learn to say no to the opinions of others to preserve one's moral integrity." For example, a neighbor might argue with his wife every evening but claim to be happy. In reality, Kant says the opinions of others are mere reflections of their own fears, not true expressions of happiness. As one grows older and realizes that others do not truly understand them, it becomes essential to live by one's own moral compass. True respect arises when one quietly accepts oneself. This is freedom, having nothing to justify, nothing to prove, simply living as one believes is right. The fourth pillar is fidelity to oneself, the deepest form of freedom. A person must feel that their life has meaning, and that meaning must arise from their own moral consciousness. As one grows older and others no longer depend on them, it becomes all the more important to preserve the sense that one's existence still matters. This meaning does not come from money, praise, or recognition, but from the inner sense that each day counts. Kant believed that the meaning of life lies not in living with others, but in living with oneself. For instance, a woman might apply lipstick every morning even though no one will visit her. She makes herself coffee just to enjoy the scent in the morning. Sometimes she reads poems to her cat. Though trivial, these small acts bring depth and purpose to her life. Some people grow tomatoes on their balcony, not for the harvest, but for the care involved. Others do morning exercises to avoid stiffness. Still, others keep a journal to ensure that the day does not pass unnoticed. By doing something for oneself, a rhythm is established and life loses its emptiness. If one does not feel valuable, their life becomes insignificant. As long as someone cannot find meaning in their existence, they remain trapped in a void. Therefore, especially in old age, when external relationships fade, it is crucial to find meaning in one's own actions. For Kant, true freedom lies not in external conditions, but in how deeply one is connected with oneself. Old age, rather than being an end, marks the beginning of a new phase, a time when a person must learn to rely on themselves. Freedom is not the absence of constraints, but the ability to act according to one's own laws. Those who succeed in strengthening these four pillars attain a freedom that forms the foundation of their life. Those who fail, however, will lead a life filled with chaos. Old age, therefore, is not an end, but an opportunity to develop a stronger inner freedom independent of external influences. As Kant said, man must be a law unto himself.